Prego, prego. Grazie a tutti.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. I would like to extend my greetings to the President and Vice Presidents of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I would like to thank and greet the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Antonio Tajani. I would like to thank the President of the Italian delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, Lorenzo Cesa, all authorities and guests. And I would like to thank the Honourable MP Lorenzo Cesa for his support for this initiative on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. The Assembly was established to give national parliaments, as direct expression of the peoples, a more central role within the organization. Over time, the Assembly has taken on a crucial role, making a decisive contribution to the development of Euro-Atlantic relations. It has also fostered the integration of Central and Eastern European countries and promoted cooperation with partner countries. Eloquent examples of this spirit of active cooperation are the relations with the Ukrainian Parliament and the recent parliamentary meeting hosted by the Chamber of Deputies on the margins of the 4th Conference on the Recovery of Ukraine. With the gradual accession of new states, the Assembly has increased its expertise and has expanded to bring together 281 parliamentarians from all 32 member states. Today, it is a strategic interlocutor for NATO. In an international landscape marked by serious tensions, parliamentary diplomacy is an indispensable resource for ensuring peace and security. And with this in mind, the Assembly has always stood out for its constant commitment to promoting exchange of views, dialogue and cohesion among its members. It has thus given new impetus to a transformation of NATO as a whole. Over the course of these 70 years, the Allies have been called upon to operate in a profoundly changed environment. The need to defend the alliance against localized geopolitical threats has gradually given way to a broader objective. Multifaceted and multidimensional lines of action were therefore defined. Moving along this path, the organization has redefined its strategic framework and expanded its areas of interest. In this dynamic scenario, the Assembly has been able to create new structures capable of guiding this process. I'm thinking in particular of the Mediterranean and Middle East Special Group. Its meetings, often hosted in Italy, most recently in Rome and Naples, have highlighted the importance of the southern dimension for the alliance. The alliance is a fundamental pillar of security, democracy and freedom. These are values that must be defended, safeguarded and passed on day after day with courage and responsibility. We must never forget that behind every treaty or alliance there are people, there are families and citizens who trust in our ability to protect them and build a peaceful future for them. Because there cannot be peace without freedom, nor freedom without respect for human dignity. Thank you.
Ringrazio davvero con affetto il Presidente.
I express my sincere thanks to the Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies for his very important remarks and for expressing his most sincere support to this initiative. Before giving the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Antonio Tajani, I will now read out the message of the President of the Italian Senate, Mr. La Russa. It is a great pleasure to extend my greetings to all of you as we commemorate the 70th anniversary of NATO Parliamentary Assembly's first meeting. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you in person due to official commitments, but I wish to express my sincere appreciation for this ceremony. And I would like to thank Chairman Lorenzo Cesa, the members of the Italian delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and all the organizers for hosting this event. Today, more than ever, we face new and increasingly serious fragilities worldwide. Celebrating this anniversary together must be an opportunity to renew and strengthen our common commitment to countering war, terrorism, and all other forms of barbarism, driven by our global awareness of our shared values and principles. The values of dialogue, friendship, and cooperation inspired the birth of the Atlantic Alliance. Then came the establishment of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, which provided another valuable platform for democratic debate at the service of peace and freedom. Once again, I extend to you my warmest welcome and best wishes, certain as I am that today's emotions and words will provide further expertise and insights to this fundamental path underpinned by trust, respect, and mutual understanding between peoples, between nations. This was Mr. Ignazio La Russa, President of the Senate of the Italian Republic. I will now leave the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Mr. Antonio Tajani, who is a dear friend of mine. Thank you. Mr. President of the Chamber of Deputies, Mr. President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, dear Lorenzo, Chairman of the Italian delegation to the NATO PA, my warm welcome to President De Meo, who is the Chairman of the European Parliament delegation. This shows that NATO is expanding and is becoming more and more inclusive. I'm very happy to be part of this ceremony with you. First of all, I would like to congratulate Mrs. Benedetta Botti on her appointment as new Secretary General of the NATO PA. I believe, as President Fontana said, that parliaments play a pivotal role in our international politics, because parliamentary diplomacy can do what governments cannot do. It can open new pathways which are more complicated that governments may not be able to go down. They can hold open and frank dialogues, and this enables all of us to strengthen historic bonds that are based on shared values. The Atlantic Alliance is not just a military one. It is first and foremost a political alliance, an alliance that defends democracies, their values, the rule of law, freedom. As President Fontana said at the end of his remarks, there's no peace without freedom, there's no democracy without freedom. Through the Atlantic Alliance, in which we very much believe, we want to defend these values so that more and more people uphold them. This morning I met the President of the NATO PA, or the Presidency of the NATO PA, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we highlighted that there is a sort of confrontation between democracies and autocracies. And sometimes it is extremely important to have a strong defense system, because, as the Italian President Mattarella says, balance leads to stability. And that's the way we can defend peace and stability, because the more balance there is, the more difficult it is for anyone to prevail over other people. And that's unfortunately what we've been witnessing in Ukraine. NATO, although not being directly involved in the war, cannot not look with great interest towards what is happening to the eastern flank of the alliance. We hold meetings with Ukraine, and we think it is we think that what happened is unacceptable. we think what has been going on over the last few days is unacceptable as well, as Russian attacks are not against the Ukrainian army, they are against the civilian population. Not all kinds of weapons can be used during the wars. However, we very much trust in the negotiations or in the talks that are planned over the next few days in Turkey. Dialogue at the end of the day must prevail. We must persuade Putin to not to take on aggressive positions and to sit at the negotiating table. The adoption of the 18th package of sanctions is a very important step towards this direction. We must stop money going from Moscow to the Russian armed forces. This way, we will persuade Putin to take a step back. As we said this morning, the Russian army is made up of more than 1,500,000 people who are fighting on the battlefront against Ukraine. And these soldiers are paid 2 or 3 times more than Russian workers in Russian factories. So basically taking a step back would become a social problem for Putin, because all of the Russian industry is now aimed at producing new weapons. So we must prevent this from happening, and we can do so by imposing sanctions against the Russian financial system. The final aim is to build peace. We have decided, in line with all the rules that we contributed to putting in place, we have decided to reach the 5% level of expense on spending on NATO defense as a whole, with a flexible system that with a review that is due to be carried out in 2029. Today, Mr. President, I would like to say that we cannot forget the southern flank as well. NATO, as a political alliance first and foremost, must look at what is going on in Africa, the dangers over there, because there is a growing presence of Russia, China, and Iran over there. And Libya may become a Russian naval base and Russia, by withdrawing from Syria, may end up in Libya. There's growing instability in sub-Saharan Africa, which creates instability. We face a problem related to illegal immigration, and we have been fighting against human smugglers who have been smuggling drugs and weapons as well. And also there's the Middle East as well. There, peace and democracy must prevail, and there must be shared solutions. This won't be easy. We keep working so that a ceasefire is immediately reached in Gaza. We said this firmly. We are friends of Israel. However, it is of the utmost importance to end military operations. And we also say to Hamas that it is unacceptable for there to be hostages, or for there to have been hostages since October the 7th. These hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. Our goal is peace, and NATO was set up to build peace. The Transatlantic Alliance is an alliance seeking peace. We live in an ever-changing world with political, economic, and trade challenges, so we must look to what is going on in the Indo-Pacific region as well. Also in an effort to defend freedom of navigation and freedom as a whole. Our Navy, which I thank very much indeed, has been present in that area, is present in that area, which shows that we very much cherish freedom of navigation. I thank our armed forces, and in particular our Navy, that takes part in the Auspices, in Operation Auspices, to protect trade vessels that cross the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, and that take our products eastwards. NATO must be vigilant, and the NATO PA must also follow, from a political point of view, all of these developments, and perhaps may even influence or have an impact on all of these developments. So, thank you very much for choosing Rome. I would like to thank the Honourable MP Cesa, and thank you very much indeed for being in our beautiful capital. And I'm convinced that parliamentary diplomacy, and by the way, I used to be president of the European Parliament, I'm convinced that parliamentary diplomacy may achieve very ambitious goals. Thank you very much indeed.
Ringrazio.
Thank you. I would like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Antonio Tajani, for his contribution and for his very important words. And I would also like to thank him for constantly supporting, together with Minister Crosetto, the delegation that I chair. Both ministers this morning met with the President of NATO PA, with the Vice Presidents, with myself, and these talks have been extremely important. Now I would like to say a couple of words myself. First of all, I would like to welcome and extend my greetings to all of you. I would like to extend my greetings to the President of the Chamber of Deputies, Lorenzo Fontana, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs, Antonio Tajani, and I would like to thank him sincerely for accepting the invitation to attend this event and take the floor for a welcoming remark and for sharing some very valuable insights with us, with NATO PA. So thank you once again to the President and the Minister Tajani. I would also like to greet with great affection and gratitude the President of the NATO PA, my dear friend Marcos Perestrello, who strongly supported this initiative. Under your wise leadership, Marcos, the Assembly is honoring such an important anniversary with a series of valuable initiatives, and the Assembly is making every effort to keep the transatlantic bond strong in these very hard times. I would also like to take this opportunity to extend my greetings to the Vice Presidents of the Assembly, Agnes Vadai, our Hungarian friend, and Senator Fernando Gutierrez, Vice President of the NATO PA. And I would like to thank them most sincerely for their participation, which cannot be taken for granted, and for the important work that they do every day. I would also like to greet also the chair of the EU delegation for relations with NATO, Salvatore De Meo. A few weeks ago, we went to the European Parliament, and it was very touching because we had a meeting between the NATO PA and the European Parliament, and it was extremely important. That's why I want to thank Salvatore De Meo for this initiative. And I would also like to thank all participants in this ceremony. Your contribution will undoubtedly enrich the discussion and provide valuable insights. For 70 years, the NATO PA has been a fundamental pillar of transatlantic political dialogue and democratic strengthening within the alliance. Established in a context of post-war reconstruction and rising geopolitical tensions, it has been able to transform itself from an informal gathering into a structured and authoritative interlocutor within the NATO system. It has contributed greatly to the transparency, cohesion, and democratic legitimacy of the Atlantic Alliance. Over the decades, the Assembly has accompanied and assisted the alliance in the major challenges it's had to face. From peacekeeping in the context of the Iron Curtain to the enlargement process, from managing a post-Soviet international scenario to the Balkan crisis, from the fight against the terrorist threat after 9/11 to combating jihadist radicalism. In the face of these demanding and multifaceted challenges, the Assembly has provided NATO with direction and strategic guidance, always inspired by the will to defend peace and freedom of peoples. It has also contributed not only to the construction but also to the durability of a world order based on liberal values, multilateral institutions, and the rule of law. Today, however, the legitimacy of this order is undergoing a major crisis. The Russian aggression against Ukraine and the resurgence of conflicts in various international contexts have rekindled tensions that we thought had died down. The picture is further complicated by the perceived but only apparent divergence between the political agenda and the interests of Europe and the US. And in this regard, I want to clearly reiterate a strong conviction of mine. We need to reject the idea that the US can do without Europe and that Europe can do without the US. In such a fragmented and constantly evolving geopolitical context, a long-term strategic vision requires that we do not give in to short-sighted calculations and to new and adventuristic solutions. Instead, we should rely now more than ever on those alliances that have been strengthened by history and by common values. A major role in preserving and strengthening transatlantic relations is played by the NATO Assembly. The parliamentary dimension is, in fact, an ideal platform for cementing reciprocal relations, as witnessed by the excellent relations with the US delegation. It's also a privileged arena for giving global processes a truly democratic imprint, one that is closer to citizens and more sensitive to the needs for peace and security that as such can only emerge from below. I would now like to emphasize the great symbolic value of the spring session of the Assembly, which was held in Dayton, Ohio last May. It symbolized not only the trade union between Europe and the US, but it also marked 30 years after the peace accords that put an end to the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a great example of the stubbornness with which the Atlantic Alliance seeks to consolidate the goals set by the Washington Treaty through the promotion of a true peace dialogue. In Dayton, we reaffirmed the Euro-Atlantic community's long-term commitment to the stabilization of the Western Balkans and to the achievement of a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, whose process of accession to the EU must be accelerated without further delay. This is the only way forward. The Assembly has approved new guidelines on burden sharing, which were officially adopted at the government summit in The Hague at the end of June, which was preceded by the NATO Parliamentary Summit in Brussels. The issue of increased military expenditure is now a priority in political, economic discussions, both at national but also at supranational level. It is important for public opinion, and this is part of our work. I'm talking to my colleagues. It is part of our work to explain to the public opinion why it is important to invest in the defense sector. Democracy and the values protected by the Atlantic Alliance are the result of the sacrifices of previous generations. But they are not achieved once and for all, unfortunately. To protect this achievement, a credible deterrence posture is needed. At the same time, it must be clear that an increase in defense spending will not affect social spending and the achievements of the European social model. 30% of Europe GDP is used for welfare and 2% to defense. We need to stick to these data. And we need to do so as an important country in Europe. In conclusion, I am confident that our democracies will face the enormous challenges ahead, from the strengthening of transatlantic ties to the creation of a strong European pillar of NATO, and I'm sure they will find in the guidance of the Assembly valuable aid and support. The Assembly will surely continue to be an instrument for cultivating peace, a just, stable and strong peace, in the hope that these are only the first 70 years of a long history to be written all together, today just like yesterday. I wish that in another 70 years, maybe in this very same hall, a young delegate could say, "We have known peace because others had the courage to defend it, even when it was difficult." May this Assembly be remembered in the same way we think of it today, as a voice that did not remain silent, as a hand that did not pull back at a time when it would have been easier to accept cheap compromises than to uphold the courage of our ideas and values. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. I will now invite the President of the NATO PA, Marcos Perestello, to take the floor for his contribution.
Grazie, Lorenzo. I will speak in English. I'm sorry for that. Usually on the NATO parliamentary assemblies, we hear the contrary, because the Italian delegation participates a lot, and they make a point, and they always speak Italian. And so, President Fontana, thank you for receiving us here in this parliament. Dear Lorenzo, President of the Italian delegation on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, Dean Bonini, thank you for the intervention you will do after. Excellencies, dear colleagues of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, dear Vice Presidents that are here with us today, I would like to extend my sincerest thanks to President Fontana and to the head of the Italian delegation, Lorenzo Cesa, for hosting this special ceremony to commemorate 70 years of allied parliamentary democracy. On 4th of April 1949, the leaders of 12 nations in Europe and North America made a solemn pledge to defend each other and their shared values. On 18th July 1955, 6 years later, 158 allied parliamentarians met for the first conference of members of parliament from the NATO countries. Our founding fathers come together with one firm conviction: NATO's commitment to collective defense needs to be anchored firmly in the alliance's democratic foundations, and it requires the active engagement of allied citizens through their elected representatives. For 76 years, NATO has succeeded throughout all shifts in the security environment because it is defined not by what it stands against, but by what it stands for. And for now 70 years, this Assembly has carried the voice of allied citizens and helped strengthen this alliance, our alliance. For 70 years, we have made the case to our citizens that NATO provides the essential bedrock of security of Europe and North America. There is a cause for celebration, but there is no time for complacency. To the contrary, we find ourselves in the most difficult security environment in a generation, with an unprecedented set of threats and challenges. Direct threats from Russia, rising instability in our neighborhood, and the menace to the rules-based order and our democratic way of life. As a consequence, our discussions in the Assembly and our efforts to influence alliance decisions in our capitals and in Brussels take on renewed critical importance. Let me therefore mention some key priorities for the Assembly over the coming months, and I know my Vice Presidents will address other critical priorities as well. First, allies must continue to stand with Ukraine, unwavering in their support for Ukraine's democracy, independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, right to self-defense and self-determination including NATO membership. Unwavering in the principles this alliance stands for, and unwavering in their commitment to bring peace through strength. Here I want to thank Italy for its steadfast support for Ukraine and its remarkable leadership on rebuilding it, as demonstrated at the Ukrainian Recovery Conference held here just 2 weeks ago. The Assembly also welcomes efforts to bring a just and lasting peace. Ukraine has demonstrated time and again that it is committed to peace. Russia, in contrast, had only responded with more lies and more bombs. We must be clear-eyed. What happens in Ukraine will determine our future, the future of our continent and beyond. That is why we need to welcome Ukraine into the EU as soon as possible and keep NATO's door open too. Second priority, we must urgently bolster defense investment capacities and the industrial base. At last month's NATO summit, allies took momentous decisions. They commit to invest 5% of GDP annually on core defense requirements, as well as defense and security-related spending by 2035. Let us be honest. This will be a very difficult task. As parliamentarians, we therefore have a vital responsibility to convince our voters and to support and implement these decisions. We must do so to strengthen and rebalance NATO and to send a clear message that we take the threats and the challenges as serious as they are. This is also the hour for Europe. We must leverage the EU's full potential in support of national efforts and in full complementarity with NATO. I therefore welcome recent EU initiatives, the Rearm Europe Readiness 2030 plan, activating the Stability and Growth Pact's escape clause, the new safe financial instrument, loosening the European Investment Bank's restrictions, and the Commission's proposal to increase, by a factor of 5, the money for defense and space in the next multi-annual financial framework. Third priority, we must increase our resilience and better counter the autocrats' hybrid warfare and their challenge to the international order. As parliamentarians, we are on the front line of the struggle to defend our democratic way of life. NATO must be too. This is why our Assembly advocates and still presses for the establishment of a Center for Democratic Resilience at NATO headquarters. Our aim is simple: to give ourselves the political means and the practical tools to defend the shared democratic values which are enshrined in NATO's founding treaty and on which the cohesion of the Assembly depends: democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. In this context, we at the Assembly applaud that allies have included spending on resilience in the defense-related financial commitment of the new defense investment plan. This new 1.5 target can be key to increase the resilience of our societies and democracies. Fourth priority, we know that to achieve a Europe whole, free, and at peace, we must also have a stable, prosperous Western Balkans inside the European family, full integration in the European Union, and those who wish NATO would finally seal long-term reconciliation and peace in the region. This year's NATO Parliamentary Assembly Spring Session marked the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Accords in the city where they were signed 30 years ago. Our meeting highlighted the many achievements of these landmark agreements and the region's remarkable transformation. Unfortunately, it also laid bare the complex remaining challenges in parts of the region, deepening political division in Bosnia and Herzegovina, entrenched obstacles to normalization between Belgrade and Pristina. We must support the region to finally unlock this potential. Fifth priority, we must look beyond the European neighborhood, and Vice President Gutierrez will address our southern neighborhood in a few moments. The challenges we face are global. We must continue to expand our network of democratic partners around the world and build global coalitions to defend the rules-based international order. Our Assembly has successfully stepped up our engagement with India, and we have reached out Brazil as well. In this regard, I also urge prompt ratification of the EU-Mercosur agreement and an agreement on EU and India free trade. Excellencies and colleagues, I have no doubt we will succeed and continue to protect the security of the 1 billion people living under NATO's roof if we continue to apply the cardinal virtues of this indispensable alliance: clarity, unity, and strength. We must be guided by the moral clarity of our shared democratic values. We must act in unison and draw on the resolute unity that underpins our credibility. We must bring to bear our collective strengths to the threats and challenges neither North America nor Europe can solve alone. Thank you.
Ringrazio.
I would like to thank President Prestrello for his remarks and for the great efforts that he has been putting in his position as President of NATO PA. I would like to take the opportunity to welcome the outgoing Secretary General, who is represented here by the Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Eric Blidal. And I would like to congratulate the new Secretary General, who is Italian, by the way, Mrs. Nicoletta Berti, who is here. I would like to welcome Mr. Alessandro Azzoni, Ambassador Alessandro Azzoni, the Italian delegate to the Atlantic Council. I think starting from September the 1st, he will replace Mr. Peronacci, who will lead our embassy in Washington, D.C. And I would like to thank him very much indeed for all the support he has given us. And now I would leave the floor to Professor Francesco Bonini, Dean of Lumsa University, to deliver his speech.
Dear Presidents, the event we're celebrating today occurred 70 years ago. This event happened in a very significant time, almost at the same time as the talks in Geneva between the four major powers. This launched a sort of a new, more relaxed phase of relations between the blocs, the so-called spirit of Geneva, that did not, however, produce any immediate or concrete results. This issue, this systemic issue, was very much on the agenda at the Alliance Paris headquarters, the Palais de Chaillot, where some 200 representatives of the parliaments of the 15 NATO countries met just after the accession of the Federal Republic of Germany. And this underlined a dynamic and open principle which characterized the beginning of this institution. And this will be the first point of my brief speech. This was emphasized very well by one of the two ladies, as they were called, who were present at the meeting, the representative of the Dutch Catholic Party, Margaretha Klompe. Her political biography from the resistance to the post-war period exemplifies very well these complex and extraordinary years in which the domestic dimension could not fail to involve also a supranational dimension. According to her, and she will become the first female minister in the Netherlands, this meant developing Article 2 of the Alliance, also in coordination with the Organization for European Economic Cooperation. This is a virtuous circle where governments come together, as well as parliaments and public opinion, which manifests itself in new and more demanding representative institutions. The Council of Europe, the Western European Union, which was reorganized in 1954, also with the accession of Italy, among others, after the failure of the EDC, headquartered at the Trocadero, and other European institutions which were being relaunched at the time. Parliamentary representation within NATO as an autonomous institution meets a fundamental requirement, namely the need to develop the economic and political aspects of the alliance, and I quote, so as to increasingly become a fundamental association of peoples. And I quote again, a policy of economic development and expansion, of full commitment and equitable distribution of social security and welfare is as essential to our survival as a free Atlantic community as is our common military defense. For any of us, a life in isolation would necessarily be a life not only in insecurity but in poverty as well. And this was at the core of this historic period for all Euro-Atlantic countries. The success of the meeting led to the decision to continue this experiment and make it permanent by convening a new meeting the following year. This decision was then followed by that of the Atlantic Council to appoint 3 wise men to present a project to develop the non-military aspects of the alliance. The foreign ministers of Canada, Norway, and Italy, Gaetano Martino. Before concluding on the developments in this area, it is worth highlighting the Italian point of view, which the minister mentioned, and this is the second point of my speech. The Italian delegation did not arrive until the very last day of the conference due to the domestic political situation in Italy, writes an official publication. In fact, these were the days of the complex transition from the Scelba government to the Segni government at the beginning of the Gronchi presidency. The votes of confidence, first in the chamber and then in the Senate, committed the members of the Italian delegation. They were able to appear in the final photo, albeit in small numbers. The representation was modeled on that of the Council of Europe. Parliamentarians are not elected but appointed. Young scholars are now working on a prosopography of Italian representatives. Suffice it to mention here, in addition to President Alli, the other representative who held this high office in 1961-62, the Christian Democrat Senator Pietro Micara, whose profile well represents that of the other Italian delegates, an expert parliamentarian rooted in its territory and well inserted in his party. I would also like to recall the name of Giuseppe Vedovato, who stands out for his very long mandate from 1958 to 1975, also holding positions of great responsibility in other parliamentary assemblies, a sign of circularity. NATO PA and Parliamentary Assembly of the European Community at the time. This highlights, as I was saying, a significant circularity of commitment, as well as in terms of foreign policy. Let's now go back to Gaetano Martino and the report of the Committee of 3 on non-military cooperation. The 3 wise men devote a chapter precisely to parliamentary associations and the parliamentary conference, which have contributed to the development of public support for NATO and solidarity among its members. In fact, despite all implementation problems, this has been the constant and consistent approach of the institution, whose 70th anniversary we are celebrating today. And this brings us to the third and final point. Historiography has divided these 70 years into periods around the end of the Cold War. Until the end of the 80s, the work of the Assembly was mainly focused on relations with national parliaments and between them. thus gaining what was defined as an indirect influence on alliance policies. Autonomy from NATO also became a vehicle for relations with parliamentary assemblies of the Warsaw Pact countries, particularly around the creation of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, which had its own parliamentary assembly, once again to highlight this institutional circularity. Despite France drawing back, in 1966 the 12th Conference agreed to adopt the name of North Atlantic Assembly. In 1968, the organization was moved to Brussels. And yes, we mentioned the new Secretary General. Well, in 1968, the new Secretary General was appointed, Philippe Desarmes, and he ensured a continued consolidation of the institution. So we get to the end of the Cold War. The Assembly participated in this transition in the spirit of dialogue on and for democracy, which also served as preparation and support for entry into the alliance. The Rose-Roth program of cooperation with the parliaments of Central and Eastern Europe was initiated in 1990 by the then President of the Assembly, Congressman Charlie Rose, and Senator Bill Roth. And this was a sign of the U.S. engagement in the institution. So the main goal was developing democracy, also through transformations. Cooperation and partnerships became key words. At the end of the century, in 1999, the current name, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, was adopted. Of course, NATO is essentially a political alliance with military capabilities and not the contrary. At the core of the alliance, its relationships are just about democratic values, as they are about the methods in which those ideals are secured. The current structure was established in 1958 with 5 committees and focused on different quadrants and countries bordering the alliance, and with the awareness that meetings between parliaments are crucial for those between governments and people. So this is a comprehensive vision of security combined with development, well-being, and in short, with democracy. And as President Cesa was saying, for another 70 years. Thank you, Professor Bonini, for your valuable contribution. Thank you, President. And thank you for your availability as well. Let's now move on to the rest of the contribution. At 5, we have to meet with the President of the Republic. So let's stick to the timetable. Maybe let's keep to 3 minutes for our contributions. I would be very grateful. I would now leave the floor to President Alli. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for hosting this event and for inviting me to attend. I would also like to thank President Perestrello and President Fontana and Minister Tajani, and I would also like to thank the Secretariat of NATO PA and the Italian delegation, whom, based on my experience, have always played a key role in this organization, and I kindly ask my colleague Herrick to convey my thanks to my colleagues in Brussels. I'm proud to have served my country and the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in my capacity as Vice President and then as President. It was an extraordinary personal experience. I understood the extent or the importance of parliamentary diplomacy, and the NATO PA is a place of dialogue, exchange of views, and it provides a very important platform for projecting stability outside of NATO borders, but it cannot just be military stability, but also from a political point of view. So in this regard, the NATO PA has been playing a key role. President Perestrello has rightly underlined that we are facing crucial challenges. And this is true also because we are faced with unpredictable challenges. But looking back at when I was president, which actually wasn't so long ago, I mean, things weren't that easier because between 2013 and 2018, China was actually playing a bigger role at the international level. Then we had terrorism through the Islamic State. Then we had millions of people moving from the Middle East to Europe. I mean, the NATO PA back in the day faced very important challenges, and as Minister Tajani said, when it comes to the south, our delegation made an extraordinary work thanks to the then chairman of the Italian delegation, Andrea Manciuri, who I thank very much indeed. We used to analyze the contexts as you do now within the NATO PA. Perhaps the only shortcoming back in the day is that we didn't fully grasp what could happen on the eastern flank. Despite our colleagues from Poland and the Baltics used to say, you don't know Putin, Putin will do so and so. And indeed, in 2022, we had to apologize to some of our colleagues in hindsight. I believe that we always think that the era we live in is the most difficult in history. When I left the Parliamentary Assembly, I talked about the 1970s terrorism. Of course, this wasn't an easier time than the time we live in at the moment. And I mentioned the words said by then Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro shortly before he was kidnapped and then killed. He said, well, if only we could say that we could skip this time and travel to the future. Well, I think that everyone could do so. Everyone would like to do so. But we can't do so. This is the time we are called upon to live in, because we are the masters of time. We are the ones that shape the future. Now we should look back to those words. And today, the NATO PA is a very important role to go down this path together. So I would like to congratulate NATO on the NATO PA on the 70th anniversary.
Saluto anch'io.
I would also like to extend my greetings to President Manciulli and the Honorable Forcelli, which preceded me in my role, and I hope I will be up to the challenge. I will now leave the floor to the Vice President of the NATO PA, Agnes Vadai, Hungarian parliamentarian, and I would like to thank her for being here.
I will try my best. Egregio Lorenzo Cesa, gentili signore e signori, sono molto contenta di essere qui oggi.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very glad to be here today.
I speak a number of languages. Unfortunately, I'm not cultivating your wonderful language, but I'm very, very grateful to be here. NATO's key purpose is to ensure our collective defense. And for 70 years, Allied parliamentarians have been in constant dialogue on how to deliver on this greatest responsibility, among ourselves and with partners, with our governments and with NATO, but most importantly, with the citizens of our great alliance. We must remember, whatever promises and pledges we are making, only our citizens can turn these promises and pledges into reality, because they are the ones who are paying for them, not governments and parliamentarians, but the very people who are paying the taxes. Therefore, we must show more respect to them. And as parliamentarians, we often meet them on the streets, and of course they are telling us what we are doing with their taxes. And they stop on the street, and they're going to stop on the street to ask, why are we spending 5% of our GDP in the next years on defense? And we must explain to them that we are not doing this because we want, although some probably, but we want the shiniest new tanks or jets. And that we want new uniforms for our soldiers, although they deserve that. No, we need to explain to the people of all our countries in plain language that we invest into security so that we can defend our lifestyle. And it's very, very important. Every parliamentarian knows how to tell it best to their people. In the country that I love the most, the older generation knows the value and cost of freedom. They saw how the Soviet tanks suppressed our revolution in 1956, how they suffered 40 years of Soviet occupation, and they know, and I know, that you cannot trust Russian leaders. But we also have to talk to the younger generation, and we also tell them that what we are doing is that we are protecting their democratic lifestyle. They want to travel freely, they want to express themselves freely, and they want to express their love freely. To do so, they don't want the Russian lifestyle. They want the lifestyle we have right now. And that's why, dear colleagues, it's very, very important that we, with our plain languages, however you want or we want, express it to all the generations. And also, in these conversations, we cannot forget about half of the population. This is why we must do much more to promote the role of women in peace and security. I'm very proud that the Assembly is a strong advocate of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Our work supports the integration of these principles into NATO and allied frameworks, and this year we are going to adopt a special report with concrete recommendations to mark the 25th anniversary of the landmark United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. And I think it's needed because some men seem to forget the world is not going to exist without women. We will also going to vote soon who is going to receive the 5th annual Women for Peace and Security Award. And let me recognize that Italy has had a very important role and a lot of nice women leaders in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly delegation. Federica Mogherini, Roberta Pinotti, and now my dear friend, Simona Malpezzi. And But, ladies and gentlemen, and especially gentlemen, we must do more. Parliamentarians are defenders of our democratic principles, and by prioritizing the women, peace and security agenda and gender equality, parliamentarians can help to counter authoritarian and anti-democratic narratives. Believe me, I also have an experience of that. This is going to strengthen our deterrence, defense and resilience. And this is what counts the most. Thank you so much. Grazie.
Grazie Agnes. Grazie.
Thank you, Agnes, not only for your speech today, but for the work that you do within the NATO PA. I will now leave the floor to my dear friend, the Vice President of the Assembly, Fernando Gutierrez, who is also the President of the Mediterranean and Middle East Special Group. We always work together to focus on this area. There you go, Fernando.
Grazie mille, caro amico.
Thank you, my dear friend Lorenzo Cesa.
Parliamentary Assembly, Mr. President Marcos Perestrello, thank you for having us here. And many thanks to the whole Italian delegation for making us possible to be here today, and to the whole Italian Parliament, President Fontana, and thank you for allowing me to address this ceremony. This year, the Assembly commemorates the 70th anniversary of a unique forum for allied parliamentarians. Next year, the Assembly will celebrate an important milestone of a unique forum bringing us together with some of our most important partners. We will mark 30 years since we extended a hand of friendship to our southern partners and established the Mediterranean and Middle East Special Group, our GSM. As Vice President of the Assembly, but also as the Chair of the GSM for the moment, I will change soon, allow me to address the southern dimension of our Assembly. The GSM is our primary instrument to engage in parliamentary dialogue and cooperation, to build trust, mutual understanding, and common responses. Here, I want to pay tribute to the role of the Italian delegation in establishing the GSM, and in the staunch support of the delegation and advocacy ever since. Italy has hosted many GSM seminars. Last year, in this chamber, this coming autumn, you will again host the GSM in Sicily and Lampedusa. Thank you, Lorenzo, for making it possible too. I would like also to acknowledge the important work that Andrea Manciulli, present here with us today, carried out when he was rapporteur and chair of the GSM. Thank you so much, Andrea. Over the last 3 decades, the Assembly has built up strong relationships in the Middle East, North Africa, and Sahel. Our dialogue and cooperation with our partners help build trust and align our perspectives. It helps to advance common values and defend the rules-based international order. But we must do more and will do more. Deeper dialogue and cooperation are needed more than ever, because we share many of the same threats and challenges, because southern threats and challenges are directly tied to allied security and the security of our partners, and because we are stronger when we address this together through dialogue and cooperation to foster security, stability, and development. Last year, the Assembly adopted a package to strengthen our existing southern partnerships as well as explore new ones. Dear Lorenzo, since you recently assumed the role of co-rapporteur of the Partnership Review together with our President, you have also advocated for a stronger focus on southern neighbors. I want to thank you for this effort. Excellencies, dear colleagues, we must deepen our open and frank political dialogue with our southern partners across the board. That is why we are working hard to intensify existing and establish new relationships. But we also want to seek more practical cooperation. In particular, we would like to support parliamentary capacity building, especially on democratic good governance in the security and defense sector. The establishment of a Center for Democratic Resilience at NATO headquarters could be able to play an important role. It could provide best practices and assistance on resilience, disinformation, hybrid threats, and foreign malign interference. I know that the GSM can count on the continued support from the Italian delegation on all these matters. I would like to finish by congratulating the NATO Parliamentary Assembly to celebrate its 70th anniversary and to the GSM to celebrate next year 30th anniversary. Thank you for your attention and wish you all the day. Thank you.
Grazie all'amico Gutierrez.
I would like to thank my friend Mr. Gutierrez, and I will now leave the floor to my friend Simona Malpezzi, who presented an excellent report on Ukraine in Dayton. Hopefully, there will be a truce in Ukraine over the next few months.
We really do hope so. Marcos, Agnes, it's wonderful to have you here, and I would also really like to thank you, Lorenzo, our president. You've shown once again how this role is not just a simple job for you. You really believe in it, and you are firmly convinced that the work we are doing is useful for our citizens. And this is the very spirit with which NATO PA was created. Governments alone could not do enough. Legislators and lawmakers had to come together, parliaments had to come together to work together. And that's exactly what we are doing. We meet, we study, we look at different issues. We exchange views and we get to know each other. And I believe this is one of the key words here, which characterizes our action as delegations within the Assembly. This is what politics should be about, trying to recognize the other despite the differences without delegitimizing the other. And I believe that what we're doing in this delegation is helping us meeting other people and exchanging views. We are all different. We all represent different political parties. However, we are called upon to come together and analyze issues together, leaving behind our own background, our own ideas, in order to really adopt a serious approach. And seriousness is another key word, because we are called upon to talk of defense and security with great seriousness, so we can then explain this to our citizens. We cannot just use simple slogans. They do not represent the reality. And that's why we need to work together. This is our mandate. This is our job. And we are called upon to show great responsibility, another key word at this time. This responsibility, we owe it to the citizens. As Agnes was saying earlier on, the citizens need to understand, to know what we are doing and why we are doing it. They need to know the reason why we are taking these decisions, these hard decisions as well. And that's why we need to be accountable and never superficial. The work we do within the committees, within the special group for the Mediterranean and all other committees, really brings us to going to the core reason of every single decision. And I think that all of us of the Italian delegation, we've also grown a lot. We are different from when we started. We are studying. We are learning so much. And this is what politics requires of us as well. Politics is not just for politics' sake. Our experiences need to be shared. And politics needs to give back to the people. And that's what we are trying to do here, Lorenzo. We really need to give back to our fellow MPs. And I know that this issue is very important to you. But we must especially give back our experiences to citizens, to the public opinion. We have to decide whether we want to have a leader politics, a real politics that looks at the future. And there can be no future without peace and without freedom. Thank you, Simona, for your intervention. And we'll now leave the floor to MP Andrea Orsini, Vice Chair of the delegation. Please, Andrea, be brief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the excellent work you've been doing and you've been asking us to do. I join you in welcoming our most distinguished guests from the NATO PA. I would like to underline that not only are they wise and important interlocutors, but they are first and foremost friends, and we very much cherish these opportunities to exchange views. Perhaps these views may be different from time to time, but we share common values, basically love for freedom. Parliamentary diplomacy is important for this reason. It is not a place where decisions are made. Strictly speaking, we do not make decisions, so we provide recommendations. But is this a limitation? Is this a limit? No, I don't think so. I think that cooperation between us is made up of a mutual understanding, exchange of views. NATO as an alliance has become ripe, must grow, but first and foremost must become ripe in the people of the mind, and of course in the minds of the people, and of course in the minds of MPs first and foremost. For example, in organizations such as NATO, they do not have the opportunity to get to know like we do. This is what we do, by contrast, in the meetings we hold, because we have the same fundamental values. This is the only value-based alliance, whereas the other alliances that are contrary to us are not based on common values. For example, Chinese communism, or Russian conservatism, or Islamic integralism in Iran have nothing to share except their hatred towards our societies, towards what we believe in. Our societies are the only ones where parliaments are at the core of politics. The parliaments are present elsewhere, but unfortunately they're simply mirrors of political leaders. In our democracies, the peoples are really the ones who govern. I will now skip all the rest, otherwise Chairman Cesa will tell me off. But I would just, because Chairman Cesa is a very bad guy, he looks very kind and mild, but he isn't in reality. I will just say that as I said, the NATO PA is a place where we can speak frankly and openly and exchange views. And it's not by chance that the presidency members who are here today all come from opposition parties, because the NATO PA is able to mirror and represent the different facets of our multifaceted societies. And this allows us to exchange views and talk to each other and understand each other. And sometimes our recommendations actually were taken before the decisions made by the alliance itself. So I would like to congratulate the NATO PA and NATO in general. I don't think that any alliance in human history has lasted 75 years, and I don't think that any parliamentary alliance has lasted for 70 years. And I'm convinced that we will keep on living for another 70 years, and that those that will come after us will walk on our footsteps, and will walk on the footsteps of the excellent work that President Presley and our friends have been carrying out. Thank you very much, Andrea. To wrap up, I would like to thank the Secretariat in Brussels and in Rome as well. And I would like to thank all the speakers and all those who attended this meeting. I would also like to thank the President of the Italian Republic, Sergio Mattarella, who is going to meet us in a short while. By doing so, he will confirm the high value that Italy attaches to the Atlantic Alliance. So thank you very much indeed to all the attendees, and have a very nice day. Thank you very much indeed.